And the new Hitler of international politics, that's what Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says U.S. President Donald Trump is after Tuesday's hard-edged speech. And Trump's speech offered a grim portrait of a world in peril, adopting a more confrontational approach to solving global challenges from Iran to Venezuela, and again giving platform to his much-flaunted American power. Maduro was angered by Trump's description of the situation in Venezuela, which he warned the U.S. was considering what further actions it can take. But the Venezuelan president says he is prepared to resist any actions, even a military invasion.
Look, President Trump, get out of Venezuela. We're a free land, a land to be respected because we're a land of liberators. We faced and defeated the biggest empire in the world 200 years ago in Latin America, and today we'll win once again.
Only thing I'd say to President Trump is that nobody steps on our streets, the sacred land of Bolivar, the Chavez, or the Venezuelans. Be careful, because in Venezuela, we are ready to give our lives for our revolution, for our homeland.
And not surprisingly, Cuba also feels the same way about Trump's speech, calling his comments about the island disrespectful, unacceptable and meddling. The country's foreign ministry reiterated it was not involved in the alleged incidents that had harmed U.S. diplomats in Havana. Now, during his address, Trump had called Cuba corrupt and destabilized, saying he would not lift the U.S. trade embargo on the country until it made fundamental reforms. But Japan's caught the speech high, especially the part over the North Korean nuclear and missile issue. And Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said Trump's speech hit the core of the need to confront North Korea and what the other world powers need to do about the issue. Trump had warned that the U.S. will be forced to totally destroy North Korea unless Pyongyang backs down from its nuclear standoff, mocking leader Kim Jong-un as a rocket man on a suicide mission.
We highly regard that he has reaffirmed our aim to denuclearize the North Korean peninsula, and also for the strong call for cooperation by the international community, including China and Russia, to add further pressure on North Korea. We also regard President Trump's stance of announcing all options are on the table, and we would like to continue our cooperation in security matters between Japan and the U.S. as well, among Japan, the U.S. and the South Korea.
And Winstanley-Chesters is a research fellow from Australia. He's actually Robert Winstanley from Canberra, Australia. He joins me now via Skype to share his thoughts on the speeches that have so far highlighted this 72nd session of the UN General Assembly. Thanks for joining us, Robert.
Thank you for having me.
Well, different reactions to the speeches, especially that of Donald Trump, the U.S. president. Now, let me go quickly to the main issue right now, which is, of course, Rohingya. Over 400 Muslim Rohingyas have had to flee the country, Myanmar. And, of course, Suu Kyi didn't seem to, speak directly at the real issues. Now, concerning the 72nd General Assembly, do you think enough really has been said about goings-on in Myanmar as it pertains to the Rohingya?
I haven't actually heard anything said about the Myanmar from people like Donald Trump. I noticed that the president of Nigeria made reference to the Rohingya in his speech. But I don't think really, I'm not sure yet that the entire situation about that has played out. I think Aung San Suu Kyi is in a very difficult position, but I think in generally people have considered her to be a bit of a saint-like character, and perhaps the element of her Buddhist, of her Burmese nationalism, her Myanmar nationalism hasn't been considered entirely. But I'm not entirely sure how the United Nations can solve the situation like that in the very short term. But it sounds like a sort of a situation which would require long-term peacekeeping, but only if the Myanmar government finds that acceptable. And unfortunately, they haven't seemed to even recognize the character of the situation yet, let alone find the prospect of having UN peacekeepers or UN interventions on its own soil acceptable.
If there were going to be any kind of interventions from the UN, what manner of interventions would you expect, especially now that the UN General Assembly is going on?
Well, I mean, I've seen people here in Australia calling for interventions on the scale of Bosnia in the 1990s. I can't quite imagine that happening, but I think the UN organizing a more coherent approach to the refugees in Bangladesh at the moment might work, and eventually those people, those several 100,000 Rohingya, are going to have to return to Myanmar, or Myanmar is going to have to deal with the fact that the Rohingya actually are resident in Myanmar, which is something that the Buddhist nationalists and the Myanmar nationalists have not been willing to accept yet. And actually, I think the general population of Myanmar is not really able to accept Rohingya as being citizens yet.
And that in itself is a problem. Well, the UN theme for this year, the General Assembly, is of course focused on people striving for peace and a decent life for all on a sustainable planet. Let's move on to the issue of North Korea. That is a major issue on the table now. Looking at Donald Trump's stance, the kind of words he's used concerning North Korea, as against President of Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari's call for a delegation led by the UN Security Council to have some kind of face-to-face with the North Korean leadership. Which would you recommend as the best way forward to bring the world back from the precipice?
I think what Kim Jong-un in North Korea would most like is something along the lines that President the President of Nigeria suggests, a system of meetings of the various characters and diplomats with North Korea, because that is essentially what one of the points about all of this nuclear development and military capacity in North Korea has been, to put North Korea, a frankly very small country with a very small GDP in relation to lots of other countries, very underdeveloped in relation to lots of other countries, on the world map, connecting and interplaying with world leaders on the world stage. So I actually think that ultimately some form of diplomacy will have to come about, even though the situation currently seems very difficult. I am used to reading North Korean media narratives and government statements which sound very like Donald Trump's own statement at the General Assembly. So perhaps I am a little more immune to such intemperate language.
All right, still talking about, of course, Donald Trump's language, saying that America first is still the main policy. He said this at the floor of this, the General Assembly, and has called on other nations, other leaders of other nations, to take the stance of their own countries first. Imagine a world where all world leaders, including Donald Trump and others, decided that it will be their countries first. What kind of a world do you think we'll have?
I think it would be an appalling, a terrible world in lots of ways, much more dangerous. I think this is much more dangerous than it is now. This is a time when the world needs to make agreements like the Paris Agreement on climate change and really cooperate together and, in a sense, sacrifice a little bit of national sovereignty or national interest for the sake of the planet. I live in a country at the moment which has had the hottest winter on record, and preceding that there was the hottest summer on record, where the major site of natural interest, the Great Barrier Reef, has started to die at incredible levels because of the sea level, because of the temperature warming in the ocean. And so, you know, this is climate change, and these sort of environmental crises are happening right now. So this is a sort of this is the time for exactly the opposite of what Donald Trump suggests. But I actually think Donald Trump plays a lot to his base in the United States and sort of likes to reiterate a lot of his campaign slogans. So America First being a classic.
Yes, indeed. Robert Winstanley-Chesters, research fellow from Australia University. Thank you so much for joining us on the News Hour.
Thank you very much.